In 1992, a young mother was gunned down in front of her children. Police searched for answers but found nothing. Then family members offered a startling clue. It would take local and federal agents to untangle an intricate web of money, drugs, and murder, to capture the architects of a heartbreaking crime.
Two young boys were the only witnesses to their mother's murder. The horrible crime appeared unmotivated, senseless, and random. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The victim, the wife of a prominent Atlanta attorney, was also a woman burdened with a secret. The FBI believed that secret led to her death. They hoped its discovery would also lead to her killer.
November 29th, 1992, Atlanta, Georgia. Travelers returned home at the end of the Thanksgiving holiday.
It's been a long trip, but I'm ready to get home. What about you?
39-year-old Sara Tokars and her two children had spent the long weekend with her parents in Florida. Her husband, a well-known lawyer and judge, was away on business. After a 9-hour drive, they arrived safely in their suburban Atlanta neighborhood of Marietta. The house was dark as they pulled into the driveway. But it was not empty. Sara did not see a man waiting in the shadows of the garage. He brandished a weapon. The gunman forced Sara back into the SUV. The terrified woman had a 6-year-old at her side and a 4-year-old still asleep in the car. She had no choice. The man put his gun to Sara's head and told her to drive towards the city.
Make this left now, this left.
She followed instructions. As they reached an empty development, he told her to turn off. She refused. She pleaded with him to let her children go. With a single gunshot to her head. As the gunman grabbed her purse and fled, the vehicle kept rolling. The children still inside. When it came to a stop, Sara's 6-year-old son had to reach across his mother's body to turn off the ignition. He unbuckled his groggy 4-year-old brother from his car seat, then ran to the nearest house. There, a neighbor called 911. Officers responded to the report of a possible homicide in the vicinity of Powers Road. Cobb County Police were dispatched immediately. Homicide detectives arrived as officers fanned out to search for the gunman. Police briefed them on the spot. The two young boys who witnessed the shooting identified the victim as their mother, Sara Tokars. Their father, Fred Tokars, was out of town. Police were already trying to contact him. Forensic technicians examined the vehicle where it had stopped. There might be trace evidence outside as well as inside the car. An analysis confirmed what the boys had told police. The gunman was sitting directly behind Sara Tokars when he pulled the trigger. Blood spatter patterns suggested he had used a shotgun. Detectives knew it would be difficult to get detailed information from children so young, especially after such a traumatic experience. The oldest one, 6 years old, would try his best. He said the killer was a black male, wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and a cap. He could not be more specific. The boy didn't know which way the killer had run after he grabbed his mother's purse. But he said the weapon looked like a pirate's gun that you would see on TV.
And we'll get in touch with him.
Detectives were not sure what he meant. Maybe the autopsy would tell them more. Detectives tracked down relatives living in the area to take custody of the boys until their father could be located. Police learned the family's address by running the plates on the vehicle. They continued the investigation at the Tokars' home where the abduction had occurred. In the living room, they found a security dowel lying next to a sliding glass door. The killer had likely entered the house here. The home security system had not been activated.
Right here, let's get some photographs.
No alarm sounded as the intruder entered.
And then after that, I want you to go ahead and process it.
Perhaps a burglar had taken advantage of the lax security, and Sara surprised him when she returned home. Whoever the burglar was, he hadn't left any trace evidence at the Tokars' home. There was little to go on, according to Cobb County Chief Detective Arthur Allred.
At this point, we just really didn't know what happened. This was in a upper middle class neighborhood. This was a mother with her 2 children, and this type of crime was just didn't occur in this area at all. The most serious crime we had probably vandalism. So initially, we were really baffled as to what had happened and why.
Sara's eldest son worked with a police sketch artist and described the man in the dark who had killed his mother. The drawing of a thin black man wearing a knit hat was released to the public. But the 6-year-old's description was too vague to elicit any viable leads. The victim's husband, Fred Tokars, was contacted at his hotel in Montgomery, Alabama. He returned to Atlanta immediately. As a criminal defense attorney, Tokars was aware he would be considered an early suspect in his wife's murder. He had his own attorney present when he spoke to authorities. They quickly established his alibi so police could pursue more promising leads. Detectives confirmed that at the time of the murder, Fred Tokars was in Alabama. He had been visiting a client incarcerated in the Montgomery jail. The grieving husband assured police that he and Sara had a strong marriage.
I don't answer any questions. I just want to basically, see the kids.
He would do anything he could to help find her killer.
Due to the nature of what's going on, we have a job to do.
All right, guys.
Tokars agreed to walk detectives through the house.
Anything messed up here? Yeah, you're alone.
As far as he knew, the doors were locked and the security rod was in place when he left for Montgomery.
Set it before you left, right? My wife usually does that.
He explained that they had intentionally left the alarm off because a plumber was scheduled to fix the hot water heater over the weekend.
Look out for their safety.
We can.
Tokars led detectives to the basement where he kept his home office.
Take a moment here. I want you to really look around.
He said he usually had about $1,500 locked in the safe.
Those usually kept.
Now it was open and empty.
I do keep some cash in there.
Its combination was hidden in a nearby file.
$1,000 for the trip.
Only he and his wife knew it was there. Perhaps Sara had taken the money on her trip to Florida. It was also possible that the burglar had found the combination and taken the cash.
Looks like everything's okay.
Ultimately, Tokars couldn't specify how much money, if any, was missing.
All right.
To police, nothing else in the house seemed disturbed, and no clues pointed to the killer's identity.
A lot of people were frightened. A lot of people just couldn't believe that this would happen to a mother in front of her children, and especially in the neighborhood where it occurred. So there was a lot of pressure on the department to find who had killed her.
Police hoped the coroner's report would give them more. Lab examiners confirmed that Sara Tokars had been killed with a .410 shotgun. To a child, if that type of weapon had been sawed off, it might look like a 17th century flintlock pistol used by pirates on TV. Only the plastic wadding and buckshot were recovered from the SUV.
It might be a 410 or maybe a 20 gauge.
Because no shell casing had been ejected, they would not be able to match anything to a specific weapon if one were later found.
Maybe 410. I'll get to the ballistics for you.
The examiner discovered no foreign hairs, fibers, or fingerprints on the body or clothing.
They fell out of the body bag.
The anonymous killer had left nothing that could lead investigators to his
Very
identity.
interesting to show you.
Former Assistant United States Attorney Buddy Parker, like many members of the Atlanta community, was stunned by the news of the murder.
We had a discussion that morning about the notoriety of the homicide, of it being the wife of Fred Tokars, who was known within the legal community, having been a former assistant district attorney for Fulton County. I was familiar with Fred Tokars in his role as a criminal defense lawyer in a matter that was then pending in our office, a matter regarding the investigation of a particular drug dealer.
Fred Tokars' lucrative criminal defense practice brought him into contact with many men accused of federal drug charges. Rarely does such a murder have a simple motive. Solving the case would not be easy. The following day, 2 women came to the Cobb County Police Station. Sara Tokars' sister and her cousin had a file they needed to show detectives. Sara had entrusted her sister with the file 3 years earlier.
You know what this is?
It's the cell of her husband, Fred.
At the time, Sara made her promise to take it to police if anything ever happened to her.
Something would happen, like divorce, overseas banking.
It contained what appeared to be lists of Fred Tokars' bank accounts and their balances.
I told her 3 years ago.
Well, how long have you known?
The women suggested that the papers might be related to Sara's attempt to divorce Fred.
His family, my family have been friends. I can't put up with it anymore.
Her sister's marriage was not as strong as Fred had led police to believe.
Well, that might be so, but I know what you've been doing.
Sara wanted a divorce, but whenever she broached the subject, he threatened to use his legal connections to get sole custody of their children.
All right, guys. Let me tell you something.
Sara was
You have a
trapped.
divorce, but you'll never see the
If
kids
she ever
again.
hoped to divorce
I
Fred and
know
keep
all
her
these
children,
judges, all
she
these
needed
attorneys
leverage.
now.
Well, in case there was a divorce.
After the incident, Sara had secretly copied some of Fred's files and gave them to her sister for safekeeping.
Quite a long time.
She suspected they outlined illegal activities he might be involved in.
Liar. Wasn't treating my sister.
If that were so, they could be her only leverage against him in court.
She went to his office.
Some of the information you
Investigators reviewed the files carefully. Perhaps they would help police determine whether Sara Tokars' death was a botched robbery or a carefully planned conspiracy. Cobb County detectives called the FBI office in Atlanta for help. They hoped that Special Agent Michael Twible could determine if Fred Tokars' bank statements were somehow linked to the murder.
We were contacted by the Cobb County authorities concerning the documents they had discovered, which were brought to them by Sara Tokars' sister and cousin, which revealed that Mr. Tokars, her husband, had been involved in setting up offshore bank accounts and offshore corporations.
It would take time for Agent Twible and his team to unravel the names and finances on those documents to see if they had something or nothing to do with the death of Sara Tokars. On December 3rd, 1997, 4 days after the shooting, Sara Tokars was laid to rest. Her 2 children were left motherless. Investigators still had no leads that pointed to the identity of her killer. Whoever had killed the young mother was still out on the streets. Just after Thanksgiving in 1997, the FBI and local investigators continued their search for the lone gunman who shot and killed Sara Tokars, the wife of a prominent Atlanta attorney, in front of her 2 young children. Sara's 6-year-old child had given a vague description of the suspect to police in Cobb County, Georgia, but they still had no solid leads. Copies of her husband's bank statements were sent to the FBI field office in Atlanta for closer scrutiny. Special Agent Michael Twible hoped to provide insight as to whether the documents might somehow be connected to Sara Tokars' murder.
Once we reviewed these documents, it revealed that Mr. Tokars had set up offshore banks and corporations not only in the Turk and Caicos, but in Montserrat and in the Bahamas. These documents also showed that he had set up numerous corporations in nominees' names in the Atlanta, Georgia area.
Nominees are people who in name only head dummy corporations for purposes of money laundering. Although Fred Tokars had never been accused of money laundering himself, he was an expert on the subject. Buddy Parker, a former assistant U.S. attorney, was aware that Tokars was not only a well-known lawyer, he was also a certified public accountant.
Fred Tokars was known within the Atlanta legal community as a person who held himself out to be an expert in money laundering, and in fact conducted lectures for law enforcement authorities at the state level on money laundering.
Investigating the finances of a man like Fred Tokars would be a delicate business. He was well-liked and well-connected among Atlanta's power elite.
He was well-known in Cobb County. He was also well-known in political circles, in as much as he had been appointed as an assistant municipal court judge, and he had been an assistant solicitor for Fulton County. He had a lot of friends in high political places and helped on numerous campaigns of state and local officials.
I'm wondering if you have any...
Investigators again met with Tokars and his attorney. They told him they believed his business dealings could be connected to his wife's killing and asked him about his clients.
Has your wife mentioned anything to you about anyone that she...
Fred Tokars admitted several were violent drug dealers who operated in dangerous circles. One in particular was reputed to have been a major cocaine supplier in the Atlanta area. The dealer had returned home to Detroit after another one of Tokars' clients had allegedly forced him out of the South. Not long after, he was gunned down in front of his mother's home. The murder weapon, a handgun found later in a nearby alley, had been traced back to a gun shop north of Atlanta. Tokars suggested that the dealer's remaining crew, or even those who murdered him, could have had Sara killed to send a message to the lawyer.
We can arrange something and get it over to you.
Detectives secured a warrant to search the attorney's office to see if they could find any link to the killer in his papers.
Okay, thank you.
That night, local investigators and IRS agents conducted a thorough search of the office. They confiscated files, datebooks, and business calendars dating back several years, but found no direct clues to the murder. In the margins of Tokars' datebooks, agents did find notations of offshore accounts. The total deposited in these accounts far exceeded the amount Tokars claimed on his taxes each year. It looked as if Fred Tokars had used his expertise in money laundering to his own financial advantage. Local and federal officials met with representatives of the Atlanta United States Attorney's Office. They suspected Fred Tokars' illegal activities went far beyond money laundering.
Money laundering was already on our radar screen, if you will. Secondly, now we have evidence coming out of the Tokars' home of offshore bank accounts. With those two clear facts, we felt that there was a firm basis to open an investigation formally on Fred Tokars.
Parker learned that in August of 1992, the DEA had arrested one of Tokars' clients in a sting operation. His name was Anthony Brown. Brown had a reputation as a cocaine dealer in Atlanta. The day before, agents had intercepted one of his couriers in Texas and seized more than 100 kilos of cocaine. Inside the trunk of Brown's car, agents found $50,000 in cash. They also found documents revealing Fred Tokars was more than Brown's defense attorney. He had incorporated an Atlanta nightclub for the drug dealer.
It was believed by law enforcement that the nightclub was a front to help launder the drug proceeds of the drug trafficking organization that Brown was a member of.
DEA agent Jeff Dahlman had participated in the sting operation to arrest Brown. Parker hoped Dahlman's drug trafficking case would help with the murder investigation.
What had happened as a result of the homicide of Mrs. Tokars was that the light got turned on Fred Tokars' past of what he had been doing for the past several years. And what was illuminated was that he'd been involved with several drug traffickers in the Atlanta area.
Investigators wondered how deep that involvement went. Police re-interviewed Tokars' neighbors to see if they had missed anything.
I was wondering if on Sunday evening...
One close friend confirmed that Sara wanted to divorce her husband, but she was afraid of him. Not long before she was murdered, Sara confided that she had found some of her husband's documents that seemed suspicious. According to the neighbor, Sara said these weren't simply lists of offshore accounts. They were stronger proof of criminal activities.
Hey, listen, I need to give you a call back. Yeah, just a few minutes.
About a week and a half before Sara Tokars' murder, Sara Tokars explained to her that she now had the goods on Fred, that she had found documents or records that indicated he had engaged in or was engaging in tax evasion, and that she was going to go to the authorities with this information and she could then get a divorce.
If Sara had confronted her husband with the evidence, it might have motivated him to harm her.
Any reason to believe Tokars?
Investigators additionally found the name of a Tokars private investigator. The PI admitted to agents that Tokars had hired him to approach drug dealers about laundering their profits. He was listed as one of the owners, along with Fred Tokars, of another Atlanta nightclub, according to Special Agent Michael Twyble.
We determined that he was an owner of a company, but through our further investigation, we realized that he was a nominee. And when I say the word nominee, I mean the fact that he was delegated to the person being legally responsible as being an owner of the club, but in actuality, he was not.
Fred Tokars had constructed the entire scheme. According to the Private Eye, Tokars courted reputed drug dealers like Anthony Brown, men who had a lot of cash, but no place to invest it without raising suspicions of the IRS. Tokars, a money laundering expert, proposed depositing their drug profits in offshore accounts and in businesses like clubs that operated primarily on a cash basis. The money could then be filtered through legitimate financial institutions.
And the way you would launder the money is, even though it's still in cash, you would pay entertainers on paper $15,000, when in actuality you paid them $5,000 cash.
Tokars would receive thousands for each transaction.
He was actively involved, knowing that these people were drug traffickers and what they were doing with their money. The object was to open corporations, mainly nightclubs, cash businesses where they could easily hide their assets, where they could easily run their drug proceeds through them.
Authorities believe the connection between Fred Tokars and drug traffickers had somehow led to his wife's murder. But the details were elusive.
Not! Get back in that car now!
Weeks after the murder of Sara Tokars, a man capable of murdering an innocent mother in front of her children remained at large.
Got a shotgun blast to the back of the
By December 1992, several weeks after Sara Tokars was killed, federal and state authorities had still not found the lone gunman and still had no clues to his identity.
So it's a lot of...
Shortly before she was brutally murdered, Sara believed she had discovered papers in her husband's law office that documented his illegal activities. Former U.S. prosecutor Buddy Parker believed that Sara had likely threatened to expose Fred Tokars with those documents unless he agreed to a divorce.
That began to give us a feeling that Sara Tokars was murdered to keep her mouth shut about her knowledge or her belief about her husband's role and involvement in laundering drug money for drug traffickers.
Fred Tokars not only represented violent drug dealers, he had gone into business with them. Investigators now had evidence Tokars' clients were laundering money through several nightclubs. If his wife had threatened to expose him, Tokars, as well as his clients, had a lot to lose. The FBI took a hard look at the nightclubs the attorney had incorporated. Special Agent Michael Twyble had to wade through piles of state records, searching for a name that could link Tokars directly to the murder.
We started reviewing company and corporation records and liquor license and business license that Mr. Tokars had incorporated. We started looking at these different clubs to see actually who owned them.
Major drug suppliers like Al Brown contributed the funds. A middleman purchased the clubs. And Tokars set up the entire deal, as DEA agent Jeff Dahlman discovered.
They didn't really trust Mr. Tokars to launder money in offshore bank accounts. It was too elaborate. They wanted their money where they could touch it, where they could feel it, where they could use it every day, where they could buy cars with it. And so the laundering, in essence, in this investigation, turned towards the laundering of money through nightclubs, through incorporation of the nightclubs.
FBI agents interviewed employees of the nightclubs. Over time, they were able to piece together the structure of the business, its owners, and its profits. To Attorney Parker, it was like assembling a complex puzzle.
Never heard anything about money laundering.
The picture of how the nightclub money laundering was structured was really developed through insiders, through inside drug traffickers who ultimately decided to cut plea agreements with us and to cooperate and provide evidence.
But nothing from the nightclubs pointed to Sara Tokars' killer. After months of frustration, Cobb County Police finally got a break. A detective working on the case got a tip from his brother, a deputy in nearby Fulton County. The deputy remembered seeing Fred Tokars' name in the file for a businessman who had an outstanding arrest warrant. The businessman's name was Eddie Lawrence, wanted for writing bad checks on one of Tokars' accounts. Of all Tokars' business associates and clients, Eddie Lawrence was a name he had never mentioned to police. Authorities quickly learned that Eddie Lawrence and Fred Tokars were involved in several businesses together. These included construction, renovation, and mortgage companies. Tokars had also defended Lawrence in several minor brushes with the law. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had left.
Eddie Lawrence had, through Fred Tokars, been granted access to some of the most prominent individuals within the city. Fred would take Eddie to some of the big political fundraising functions, and all of a sudden Eddie was, like I said, he's very presentable. He could certainly mingle and not be embarrassed at cocktail functions and things, and engage in conversations, and so he was living this wonderful life, and the way he got there was through Fred Tokars.
A few days later, the young businessman agreed to questioning after police discovered records of calls between he and Tokars on the day of the murder. Eddie Lawrence said he had been in business with Fred Tokars for almost a year. He claimed the phone calls were all job-related. He knew nothing about Sara Tokars' murder. The detectives had Lawrence arrested on the bad check charge and then released him on bond. They wanted to see which one of Tokars' associates got nervous when they heard Lawrence was being investigated.
This is a shock to me when I heard about her death.
The plan worked. A confidential informant contacted police. The word on the street was that Eddie Lawrence had been looking for a hitman prior to Sara Tokars' murder. He had pressured one of his employees to help him find someone to kill a woman who he claimed stood in the way of a lot of money. The employee gave Lawrence a name, Curtis Rower. Rower was a drug addict with a long rap sheet including armed robbery. He needed money. Maybe he'd be interested. Although the informant didn't mention Fred Tokars by name, investigators finally had a potential link between the victim's husband, Eddie Lawrence, and a hitman. Detectives interviewed Eddie Lawrence.
No, I deny.
We have information.
They questioned him about his relationship with Tokars.
That says recently you were trying to get him to come.
Why would I have somebody
He claimed no involvement in the murder.
when I had nobody hurt?
Police felt he was
We're not
lying.
making any progress here. I have a warrant. Your name.
On December 16, 1992, police detained Lawrence and revoked his bail because of the flight risk. They wanted him in custody when they went after Curtis Rower. Detectives immediately secured search and arrest warrants for a house in College Park where Rower was staying. They proceeded with caution. If Rower was capable of killing an innocent woman in cold blood, there was no telling what he might do when cornered. On December 22nd, 1992, 3 weeks after a mother of two was murdered, Cobb County Police circled a home in College Park to arrest suspected hitman Curtis Rower.
This is Rower. I'm Detective Hunt. This is Officer.
The woman who answered the door said she wasn't sure if Rower was home. An initial sweep of the house produced nothing. Still, they kept up their guard. One officer thought he heard movement in a bedroom.
Curtis, you're in the bed. You see your hands.
It was Curtis Rower.
Hands where I can see them, stay on the ground, stay facing.
He was unarmed.
One out further. Lay down, all the way down. Spread your hands out. Keep them spread.
Rower was booked and charged with murder.
Give me your left hand.
He claimed that Eddie Lawrence, Fred Tokars' business partner, had offered him $5,000 to kill Sara Tokars, but Rower was too scared to go through with it. He said Lawrence was the one who had caused Sara's death. Rower admitted that he had carjacked the family. But when Sara Tokars stopped, he said that he couldn't pull the trigger. At that moment, Eddie Lawrence ran up to the car, screaming for Rower to shoot. Lawrence grabbed the shotgun and it went off, killing Sara Tokars. Both men then fled in Lawrence's car. Though police believed Rower was downplaying his role, Sara's 6-year-old son was the only other witness they had to refute his claim. He remembered only one shooter. The boy would be forced to identify the man who terrorized his family from a lineup unless Eddie Lawrence corroborated Rower's story. Authorities charged Eddie Lawrence with conspiracy to commit murder, but Lawrence refused to confirm or deny Rower's statement.
Hello?
Cobb County Police notified Fred Tokars that Eddie Lawrence and Curtis Rower had been formally charged with his wife's murder.
Eddie Lawrence.
He received the news at Sara's parents' house in Florida, where he was vacationing with his sons for the holidays.
Who was on the phone?
It's the police. They've arrested someone for the murder. So.
Thank God for that.
His relatives later said that while the rest of the family expressed relief, Fred Tokars did not. He seemed despondent. The arrests of Lawrence and Rower had made national headlines. Tokars was caught in that same spotlight and refused to give any statements to the press. Because the suspected hitman's story conflicted with Tokars' son's version, the 6-year-old was asked to view a suspect lineup. Police explained that though he would be able to see 5 men staring at him, they would not be able to see him. The one-way mirror would prevent that. When the child said he was ready, investigators called for the men. All of them resembled the boy's description of his mother's killer.
Okay, Michael. One of these gentlemen may be the person.
Detectives reassured him that he could take as much time as he needed.
You should take your time. You should look at me closely. You should tell me.
But it was no use. The child was either too young or too frightened to remember the killer's face. When relatives tried to reach Fred Tokars in Florida to inform him, he was nowhere to be found.
Fred left the company of his in-laws and returned to his hotel room where no one heard from him. And the following morning, they tried to raise him on the telephone. They tried to find him, and there were no responses.
Concerned, Sara's father rushed to the hotel where Tokars was staying.
Fred! Fred! Fred!
Fred Tokars had swallowed a handful of sleeping pills and washed it down with beer. The manager of the hotel quickly called an ambulance.
He had apparently attempted to take his life after hearing that Eddie Lawrence, this business partner of his, had been arrested for the murder of his wife.
Sara's father found a note written in Fred Tokars' handwriting on the table beside the bed. In the locked hotel room, Fred Tokars wrote a long, rambling note apologizing for the pain and suffering his lifestyle had inflicted upon his family. He wrote that Sara was a great woman. Then, on the day before Christmas Eve, Fred Tokars swallowed a handful of sleeping pills, enough to kill him. Fred Tokars lay on the bed, barely breathing. If he died, the truth about his wife's murder might die with him.
Come on, Fred.
Yes, there's been emergency.
In late December of 1992, Fred Tokars, the once prominent Atlanta attorney now suspected in his wife's murder, lay motionless in a Florida hotel room from an overdose of sleeping pills. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where they were able to revive him.
Thank you for coming down today.
After his release, he held a press conference.
Really tough time for myself and also for my children.
He told the public that he was very depressed and that the media was not making it easy.
We did this terrible crime.
Tokars had gone to the extent of establishing residency in Florida to avoid the attention.
The whole way through this, so.
But he believed that justice would soon be served.
Mr. Tokars, may we have your comment on the arrest of Eddie Lawrence?
The FBI believed justice would soon be served as well. Convinced that Fred Tokars had used his business associate Eddie Lawrence to hire a hitman to kill Fred's wife, Sara, the team of federal and local investigators would use federal racketeering statutes known as RICO to prosecute Tokars. Building a RICO case to prove Sara Tokars had been killed to protect her husband's illegal activities meant outlining those activities in detail.
The RICO statute, it attacks basically this conspiracy of individuals who are out committing all types of different crimes, not necessarily together, but they're all for the benefit of this criminal group to exist, to continue to exist, and to make money.
Looks like things are coming together a little bit. I appreciate all you.
A federal grand jury named Tokars as an unindicted co-conspirator in the homicide.
Yeah, we've come up with some.
Though Tokars' partner, Eddie Lawrence, had remained silent after 7 months in prison, investigators hoped the public indictment might encourage Lawrence to testify against Tokars. Not long after, the Atlanta U.S. Attorney's Office received a phone call that Eddie Lawrence was ready to cooperate in exchange for sentencing consideration.
We've got some work to do. Let's go.
For Lawrence's long-awaited statement, investigators secured a remote location in Georgia that would be monitored by chopper surveillance. DEA agent Jeff Dahlman was part of the team that needed to make sure nothing went wrong.
We were there before Mr. Lawrence was brought in. His location had been kept a secret from everybody involved. The only people that knew of where Mr. Lawrence was actually being held at that time were the Cobb County Police Department. Mr. Lawrence at that time was a key witness in this investigation, and his safety was paramount to everyone.
Inside a fortified house, Eddie Lawrence told investigators that he and Tokars were not just partners in the construction business. They were also involved in laundering drug money.
$900,000.
Lawrence told FBI Special Agent Michael Twible the details of the scheme.
Mr. Tokars wanted him to try to solicit drug clients in the various nightclubs and bring them to him so he could launder their money. And in turn also set up Eddie Lawrence into several businesses.
Yeah, we can get this one just a little bit later.
Lawrence owed his success to Tokars. He also owed the attorney $70,000 in business debts.
Fred Tokars approached Eddie Lawrence indicating that, that Sara now was going to try to divorce him and take everything he had, and he wasn't going to let that happen, and he couldn't afford to allow her to do that to him, and he wanted her killed.
Lawrence refused initially. Although he had been involved in drug dealing, he had never been involved in murder.
Mr. Lawrence said, well, just let her have the house and the kids and the cars. And Mr. Tokars said, I've worked so hard, I'm not going to let her have it.
Lawrence said that Tokars planned the murder for several months. His first idea was to have Sara shot in his office, but decided the couple's home was a better location. Tokars was to pay Lawrence $25,000 for the hit.
Mr. Lawrence advised that Mr. Tokars wanted to be out of town and that for Mr. Lawrence to commit the murder as a burglary, basically in front of his children, which is very unusual. He told Mr. Lawrence that the kids would get over it, that they're young, and it wouldn't bother them saying that their mother was murdered.
I found that
Lawrence admitted he didn't have the nerve to kill an innocent woman, so he hired Curtis Rower. After Rower shot Sara Tokars, Lawrence drove him away from the scene. Since he cooperated, Lawrence earned 12.5 years for his part in setting up the murder. The hitman he hired, Curtis Rower, was sentenced to life without parole. For the time being, Tokars was still a free man.
Mr. Tokars had custody of his 2 children. Our concern during this time and the rest of Mr. Tokars was that there could be some harm done to the children. And Mr. Tokars was aware that he'd been watched. The media was still down in Florida at the time. He knew that people were watching him daily, and we had to develop a plan to get Mr. Tokars out of the house where there'd be no harm done to the children or to himself, and tried to effect the arrest.
The agents knew Tokars hated the press. They posed as reporters, lurking around the condo, hoping to elicit a response from the wanted man.
And the game plan at that time was to have Mr. Tokars come out and check us out, which he had done previously to other people that had been parked in the area. The plan worked well. He came downstairs. He called the police.
Local officers arrived, aware of the ruse. Fred Tokars emerged from his condo to file a complaint.
What we need you to do, sir, is go ahead and put your hand on your phone. You're under arrest.
Instead, he was arrested.
Spread your legs for me.
Fred Tokars pleaded not guilty to the charges against him.
Go ahead and put your hand on.
But separate state and federal juries found him guilty of racketeering, money laundering, murder for hire, and murder. He was sentenced to 4 life terms with no chance of parole. For elevating his greed beyond the life of his wife and children, he will never be free again.